I never used to believe in monsters. I grew up like most people, thinking the world had an explanation for everything, that all the darkness out there was just shadow and light playing tricks on the mind. That was before the Spider Queen. Before we learned the hard way that some nightmares don't need to hide under the bed. They crawl right into your life, and you don't even see them coming until it's too late. It started with something small, a whisper really. An old urban legend about a creature that rises every Halloween, half woman, half spider, who comes back to reclaim her lost kingdom. No one took it seriously, not at first. I mean, every town has its tales, right? We had our share of ghost stories, haunted woods, and cursed houses, but this was different. October was settling in, bringing with it that chill in the air that cuts right to your bones. The days grew shorter, and the nights seemed to stretch longer, darker. People started noticing weird things around town, small things that didn't add up at first. Thin, silken threads hanging from lampposts, stretching from tree branches, and dangling from street signs. You'd walk under them, brush them away like cobwebs, thinking nothing of it. A minor inconvenience. Except they weren't cobwebs. Not really. The first person went missing a week before Halloween. It was a guy who worked at the old gas station on the edge of town. No one noticed at first, just figured he took off. He was the kind of guy who wouldn't be missed. But then someone else disappeared. A girl from the high school, someone people knew, someone people cared about. That was when the whispers started, people wondering if maybe there was some truth to the legend of the Spider Queen. It was stupid, really. Just a story to scare kids into behaving on Halloween. At least that's what we told ourselves. The night we found the first body is when everything changed. We weren't supposed to be out that late, but we had a way of slipping away unnoticed. You know how teenagers are, invincible, or at least we thought we were. It was in the woods near the old quarry, where the trees stood thick and black against the moonless sky. We'd heard about the web-like stuff showing up in odd places, and like idiots, we decided to go check it out. We stumbled on it by accident, our flashlight sweeping across something, hanging from the trees. At first, we thought it was an animal caught in a hunter's trap. Until we got closer, it wasn't an animal. The body was wrapped tightly, cocooned in a sticky gray webbing that shimmered under the weak light of our flashlights. The face, what was left of it. The skin was sagging, bloated, like something had been feeding on it from the inside. But it was the eyes that made my stomach churn. The eyes were wide open, frozen in a silent scream of terror. We didn't know what to do. Run? Scream? Call someone? But before we could move, we heard it. A skittering sound like something crawling over dead leaves. Something big. The kind of sound that sets every nerve in your body on fire, makes your skin prickle and your heart pound in your throat. We froze. Slowly, I turned the flashlight toward the sound, the beam shaking in my hands. For a second, there was nothing, just the sound of our own panicked breathing. And then something moved. Something massive, creeping out from behind a tree, just at the edge of the light. I didn't see all of it, just the legs, long, thin, and covered in bristles. 8 of them, splaying out in all directions, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. They were impossibly large, stretching out from a body I didn't dare to look at. But there was something worse, far worse. Above the creature, tangled in the branches, was a face. A woman's face. Pale, lifeless, and staring right at me. Her eyes, empty, dead, locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. That's when I saw it. The mouth. It moved. A dry, rasping whisper crawled out from her throat. "She's coming." Then, before we could react, the face, it blinked. I swear to God it blinked. Panic exploded in our group. We ran. We didn't look back, didn't think. We just ran, the sound of that skittering chasing us through the trees. We could hear it, feel it, like something was right behind us, breathing down our necks. I don't know how we made it back to town, but we did. Barely. The others tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an animal, maybe we just imagined the whole thing. But I knew better. I saw her. I saw the Spider Queen and she was real. That's when the webbing started to show up all over town. Thick, rope-like strands that stretched across alleyways, wrapped around cars, and hung from rooftops. More people disappeared. The whispers turned to screams. No one dared go out at night anymore. But Halloween was just days away. And the legend, it said she would rise fully on Halloween night. That's when our army would come. The spiders. They would swarm the town, dragging it into darkness, into her web. We had to stop her. We had no choice. But how do you stop something you can't even understand? I wish I could tell you this is where it all ended, that we found a way to defeat her before it was too late. But that's not how this story goes. No, this is only the beginning, and we're already too late. We didn't sleep that night, not after what we saw. The image of that woman's face, that dead, hollow expression blinking in the trees, kept playing over and over in my mind like some sick, twisted horror movie that wouldn't end. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the creak of the old house, made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting. The others? They tried to laugh it off the next morning, tried to pretend like what we saw wasn't real. But I saw the fear in their eyes, the way their hands trembled when they thought no one was looking. We all felt it, the creeping dread, the heavy air that seemed to press down on the town. It was all over the news by the next day. Another person gone. The missing girl's younger brother, pulled right from his bed, they said. But the cops had no idea what they were dealing with. The whole town was starting to panic. People were locking themselves inside, boarding up windows, like that would help. But we knew better. The webbing was everywhere now, tangled in fences, wrapping around mailboxes, stretching across every corner of town. And with every new strand, more people went missing. We didn't know what to do. Go to the police? Tell them we saw a giant spider monster and a dead woman in the woods? They'd think we were insane. But we had to do something. That's when we decided to go back to the woods. Yeah, it was a stupid idea, but fear does things to you. It makes you desperate. We thought maybe we could find some kind of clue, something that could stop her before Halloween. That gave us 2 days. 2 days to stop a centuries-old legend from coming true. The woods were worse this time. Quieter. Too quiet. No birds? No wind. Just that oppressive, suffocating stillness that made every step feel like a mistake. The trees loomed over us, twisted and gnarled like they were watching, waiting for something. We could feel the webs brushing against us, sticky strands clinging to our clothes, pulling at our skin. They were thicker now, more solid, like they had a purpose. Like they were alive. We stuck together, barely speaking. No one wanted to be the one to say it, but we were all thinking the same thing. We shouldn't be here. We reached the clearing where we'd found the body, but the body was gone. All that was left were the webs, thick and clinging to the trees like some kind of diseased growth. And the smell, rot, decay, the unmistakable stench of death. That's when we heard it again. The skittering, slow at first, like something was testing the air, then faster, coming from all directions. We spun around, our flashlights bouncing off the trees, catching glimpses of movement, long black legs darting in and out of the shadows. Go, someone whispered, but none of us moved. We were frozen, rooted to the spot by the sheer, primal terror of what was out there. Then a scream, high-pitched, cut off too quickly. One of us was yanked backward, pulled into the trees by something we couldn't see. The flashlight fell to the ground, spinning wildly, casting broken flashes of light on the webs that seemed to pulse, to breathe. We ran. Again. It was all we could do. Panic surged through us, and we scattered like frightened animals, crashing through the underbrush, not caring where we were going, just trying to get away. I don't know how long I ran, but I eventually found myself alone. The others gone, the woods thick and black around me. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to listen to hear if anyone was close, but all I heard was the skittering. Closer now. Much closer. I backed up slowly, my hands trembling as I held the flashlight in front of me, trying to keep the beam steady. But the light flickered, sputtering out for a moment before coming back on. And when it did, I saw her, standing just ahead of me, at the edge of the light. The Spider Queen. She was worse than I'd imagined. Not just a monster, but something ancient, something wrong. Her body was massive, legs as long as tree branches, covered in coarse black hairs that twitched and moved like they had a mind of their own. But it was her face that made my blood run cold. It was still the face of the woman from the legend, pale and gaunt, her eyes wide and dead. Her mouth stretched in an unnatural grin, revealing rows of sharp, glistening fangs. And from her back sprouted hundreds of smaller spiders, crawling over her, spilling onto the ground, swarming toward me. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my body refused to listen. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was a rasping, guttural sound that came from somewhere deep inside her, something inhuman. You're too late. I rise, with the blood of the innocent. Before I could react, I felt something cold and sticky wrap around my ankle. I looked down and my breath caught in my throat. The web, it was crawling up my leg, winding itself around me, pulling me toward her. I screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing I saw before the light went out was her face, grinning as the spiders swarmed over me, covering my skin, burrowing into the web. Then darkness. Not the kind of darkness that comes from closing your eyes, but the kind that suffocates you, that digs its claws into your soul and drags you down deeper, deeper. I thought I was dead. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was in my own bed. The sunlight was streaming through the window. Everything was calm, normal, like nothing had happened. Like it had all been a nightmare. But as I sat up, something fell from my blanket. A small spider. Then another. And another. They were crawling out of me. I looked down at my arms, my legs. Tiny black spiders swarmed from beneath my skin, pouring out from every pore, from my mouth, from my eyes. I screamed, but no one was there to hear it. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't alive either. And the Spider Queen? She wasn't done with me yet. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. I clawed at my skin, tearing at it, desperate to get them off me. The spiders. I could still feel them crawling, digging, but when I opened my eyes, there was nothing. No spiders, no webs. Just my room. Empty. Quiet. But I knew better now. This wasn't over. I hadn't escaped. My mind raced. Images of the Spider Queen still fresh, vivid, burned into the back of my eyelids. The others. Where were they? Had they made it out of the woods? I had to find them. I had to know if they were still alive. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the street. Halloween was tomorrow, and the legend said she would rise in full. I couldn't wait for that. I couldn't let it happen. I threw on a jacket and bolted out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The streets were eerily quiet for this time of night. Normally, kids would be out in their costumes, parents chatting on porches, but tonight, it was like the town had gone silent. Dead. I made my way to the old diner where we used to hang out, hoping I'd find someone, anyone. But the moment I turned the corner, I froze. The webs. They were everywhere. Thicker now, stretching across the power lines, draped over cars, tangled in trees. And in the center of the street, a figure stood motionless. It was one of the others, one of my friends. I shouted his name, sprinting toward him. But as I got closer, my stomach twisted. He wasn't standing. He was hanging. Wrapped tightly in webs, his face pale, lifeless. His eyes wide open, staring straight ahead in a frozen expression of terror. Just like the first body we'd found. Just like the others. I backed away, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just happening in the woods anymore. It was spreading. Fast. I had to keep moving. I had to get help. I turned and ran, but the moment I did, something skittered across the road behind me. That sound. The one from the woods. The one that told me she was near. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I'd see her. I'd see the legs, the pale, grinning face. I'd freeze. And I couldn't afford that now. I ran, dodging between the houses, cutting through backyards, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The sound followed me, growing louder, closer. I turned a corner and slammed into something. Someone. I screamed, my hands flying up to shield my face, but then I heard a voice. A real voice. Not hers. It was one of the others, alive, breathless, wide-eyed, just as terrified as I was. He grabbed my arm, pulling me into an alleyway. "We have to go! She's here!" he hissed, his voice shaking. "I know," I gasped, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw, he's dead, they're all dead." "We need to get out of town now," he said, his voice trembling. "She's taking over, it's everywhere. Look!" He pointed to the sky and I saw them. Huge dark shapes crawling across the rooftops, long legs stretching from shadow to shadow. They were everywhere. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Silent, stalking, waiting. "We can't just run," I said, pulling my arm free. "We have to stop her." "Stop her?" His eyes widened, disbelief clear in his face. "How? Do you even know what we're dealing with? She's a legend. She's real. We know that now. There has to be something. Something in the legend, something we can use against her." I didn't know where this sudden determination came from, but I felt it. Deep inside, this thing, this creature, she wasn't just here to kill us. She wanted something. Her kingdom, the legend said. Her army. She wasn't going to stop until she had it all. And we were the ones in the way. We didn't have much time. "There's the old library," I said, thinking quickly. "They've got books on this town's history, old legends. Maybe there's something about the Spider Queen we missed." "We're gonna die before we even get there," he muttered, but he followed me. We made our way through the back alleys, dodging the webs that had spread like disease across the buildings. The skittering followed us, always just out of sight, always too close for comfort. Every creak, every whisper of wind sent shivers down my spine. But we kept moving. The library was dark when we arrived. Locked. I smashed a window with a rock and we climbed in, glass crunching under our feet. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. The shelves loomed over us, casting long shadows in the dim light of our phones. "There has to be something," I whispered, scanning the old, musty books. "Something about her." We split up, combing through the shelves, tossing aside old papers, flipping through brittle pages. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I lost track of time. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, and the skittering outside was growing louder, closer. Then I found an old leather-bound book. The spine cracked as I opened it, and there, in faded ink, was the legend of the Spider Queen. But there was more. A detail we hadn't heard before. The blood of the innocent will raise her, I whispered, my eyes darting over the words. But the blood of the cursed will destroy her. What does that mean? He asked, coming up behind me. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing, this wasn't just about survival anymore. We had to stop her. We had to find out what it meant. And we had to do it before Halloween. Suddenly, the window shattered behind us. We spun around just in time to see her. The Spider Queen, crawling through the broken window, her massive, bristling legs reaching across the floor, her body grotesque and bloated. The grin on her face stretched wide, those fangs glistening in the faint light. She whispered, her voice echoing in the silent library. You cannot escape me. My blood ran cold. The floor beneath us trembled, the sound of thousands of spiders swarming outside. There was no time. I grabbed the book, clutching it to my chest, and we ran. But this time, I knew we weren't going to make it. Not all of us. And I had a sickening feeling about who the Spider Queen really was. The skittering grew louder, and my chest felt like it was going to burst from the pressure. The Spider Queen was coming, and this time we had no more places to hide. No more time to run. I clutched the book in my hands as if it were some kind of shield, but deep down, I knew we couldn't fight her with words. We have to do something, he shouted, but his voice cracked with fear. I flipped through the pages of the book, my hands shaking. The blood of the cursed will destroy her. What did it mean? Who was cursed? Everyone who had come into contact with her, everyone who had seen her, was either dead or wrapped in her webs. Except for us. Except for me. That's when it hit me like a cold hand gripping my spine. The spiders. They had crawled out of me. I hadn't imagined it. They were inside me, in my veins, in my skin. I was cursed. I had been marked by her. And that was the key. I know what to do, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What? What are you talking about? I'm cursed. She put her mark on me when I escaped. That's what the legend means. It's the curse that can destroy her. He looked at me like I had just gone mad, and maybe I had. That doesn't make any sense. How is that going to help us? We don't need to fight her. She's already inside me. I'm going to give myself to her. No, you're not doing that. He grabbed my arm, but I pulled away. We don't have a choice. It's me or everyone else in this town. I glanced out the window. The streets were now overrun with webs, the shapes of giant spiders moving in and out of the shadows. If I don't do this, she'll take the entire town. I can end this. He stared at me wide-eyed, like he wanted to argue, to tell me there had to be another way. But we both knew there wasn't. The library's windows shattered, and she crawled in. Bigger now, towering over us, her long, spindly legs clicking against the wooden floor as she moved. Her eyes, those dead, empty eyes locked onto me, she knew. She always knew. The skittering of her swarm filled the room as they poured in through every crack, every crevice, like a black tide moving toward us. I stepped forward, book still in hand, heart racing. This was it. The Spider Queen tilted her head, her twisted grin widening. You belong to me now, she hissed, her voice scraping like nails on glass. No, I said, my voice trembling but defiant. You belong to me. With that, I held out my arms, and for a split second, nothing happened. But then I felt it. A crawling sensation under my skin, like something awakening inside me, the spiders. They were moving, writhing under my flesh, responding to her. I took another step forward, and this time she hesitated. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. I carry your curse, I whispered. And it ends here. I closed my eyes and focused, feeling the spiders crawling, twisting inside me, connecting to her. She screamed, a piercing, bone-rattling scream that shook the walls of the library. Her massive body lurched toward me, but she couldn't touch me, not now. The curse had been passed. The spiders inside me surged forward out of my body, swarming toward her, flooding over her legs, her face, her eyes. She thrashed, her long legs striking out wildly, but the swarm was too much. They were turning against her, devouring her from the inside, just as they had tried to devour me. Her scream echoed one last time, then was silenced. The Spider Queen collapsed, her body twitching, shuddering, before finally crumbling into a pile of dust and webbing. The spiders, her army, vanished into the air, dissolving like smoke. And just like that, it was over. The webs around town slowly began to wither and fall away. The streets emptied of the spiders, the skittering gone. The air felt lighter, less oppressive. People who had gone missing started to reappear, dazed, confused, but alive. The town was free. I stood there, breathless, feeling the last of the spiders crawl out of me, then disappear. I was empty now. Free. He looked at me, wide-eyed, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. You did it, he whispered. You actually did it. I nodded, barely able to believe it myself. It's over. For the first time in days, we allowed ourselves to breathe, to let the terror of what we had just gone through fade. The town would be safe now. The Spider Queen was gone, and her curse was broken. We stepped out into the street, the early morning sun just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the town. The nightmare was finally over, and for the first time, it felt like everything was going to be okay. But as we walked away from the wreckage, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, just out of sight. Something watching, waiting. Maybe the Spider Queen was truly gone. Or maybe, just maybe, she had left a part of herself behind. But that's a story for another time. For now, I was alive. We all were. And that was enough. For now,